Jeff Passan reports that the offers may be too light to move Kris Bubic. Can the Royals work around it, or do they have to look to trade someone else? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned in to another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. And you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners wondering what to expect from this channel, we come to you Monday through Friday, 30-minute episodes in length. And in season, we also have the Locked On Royals postcast, which is hosted by Chance Lebo, where he'll go to you live for about 15 to 20 minutes after the game and give you all of his thoughts so you get that immediate reaction. Before we dive into the first segment today, I want to tell you that today's title sponsor is FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the FanDuel app today. The three things we're going to be discussing involve a variety of a report that came out from Jeff Passan. We're also going to circle back to what we teased last night, which was other right-handed bats, or right-handed outfielders, I should say, that the Royals would be linked to. And then lastly, we'll wrap it up with another report that came out from Jeff Passan's article and Ken Rosenthal, I believe, that the Rangers are looking to move two bats before Friday's non-tender deadline. But to kick things off here, this one directly involves the Royals. The other two are more so about hypotheticals and if this happens, this could happen. This one kind of follows those guidelines, but for the most part, it is a very important report from Jeff Passan involving Kris Bubic and the Royals' likelihood of trading him this offseason. Now, we have discussed before, as early as yesterday, that, maybe to get that bat, you're going to have to go the extra mile if you are to trade Kris Bubic. Because Kris Bubic, coming off the shoulder injury and the year before that recovering from Tommy John, he is not at peak value. And other teams aren't just going to jump all over what he did in the first half and give you a top bat, right? Especially since Kris Bubic is going to be a free agent at season's end. So if you are going to move him, it's going to take more than just Kris Bubic as a standalone trade chip. And that raises the question. Are they going to have to look to Noah Cameron, Ryan Bergert, or Stephen Kolek? And would that get them the bat that they are searching for? So in this report, and I'll go word for word here just so that I'm not paraphrasing anything and you can get it directly from Jeff Passan. So he did an entire update on the offseason, trade candidates, free agents, where they're likely to sign, which teams are making the most noise. But this was Jeff Passan on the Royals, and this, I believe, was the only time the Royals were mentioned in the article. Teams are trying to pluck some of the Royals' rotation depth, but because of the shoulder injury that prematurely ended Bubic's season, the offers are expected to be too light for Kansas City to bite. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it also goes to show you the Royals are not going to be settling for a bounce-back candidate, in my opinion. Now, we will be talking about a bounce-back candidate in the third and final segment today, but I promise you it's not for an everyday spot, and it's certainly not for what they need in left field. I mean, J.J. Picollo has been adamant about finding that left fielder that can play every day and be in the middle of the order. And if teams are not offering that for Kris Bubic, there's going to have to be another way you work around it. That's why we talked about Blake Mitchell last night, because if you need that bat and you trade Kris Bubic and Blake Mitchell, that might be enough to get the bat that you're searching for. But you also might have to pivot, because this is not an offseason you can swing and miss. This is not an offseason where you can sit on your hands, because the Royals simply do not have a left field option. And you have an unproven commodity in right. You have a below-average bat in center field. You need to make up for it in left field. And if some of these teams are going to be pretty stiff on what they're offering you and not, trying to be too, loose with their trade proposals, right? In terms of, they're not just going to sell off a guy because you want him and they're not expecting to be good. That's probably how I should have worded it there. But for the team like the Angels, it was pointed out in Jeff Passan's article that they're expected to be one of the biggest spenders or wanting to spend a lot of money this offseason. If that's the case, then that goes against trading Taylor Ward or Joe Adell. But there have been reports this offseason that they're looking to move those two outfielders. So does replenishing the team just mean the big league level, or does it mean replenishing their farm system as well? These are all things that I am constantly contemplating in my mind about the best fits for the Royals and the best trade partners. But if there's plenty of teams out there that are asking about Kris Bubic, I'm sure that the immediate conversations were not involving big-time players. Because from their point of view, they're going to say, well, Kris Bubic didn't even throw in the second half of the season. He hasn't pitched a full season since 2022, right? Because 2023, season cut short to Tommy John. He joins middle of 2024. Season gets cut short in 2025. So he doesn't have that going for them. It's not like 2025 was the one-off. It was the outlier. It's been a constant theme of his career post-2022. And it also is when he started to pitch a lot more effectively. He looked good in 23, got Tommy John. Looked good in 24, didn't have any setbacks, but he also missed the first couple months of the season. This past year looked as good as he ever has, but only made it until, what was it, June, July? I mean, you didn't even get him for your playoff push. And so teams out there are going to say, well, we'll give you player X or player X and player Y, but we're not going to give you that everyday player. We're not going to give you that middle of the order bat, because who's to say that Kris Bubic doesn't show up to spring training, doesn't feel good, and we barely get anything out of him, and then he's going to be a free agent. So that's the hang up with Kris Bubic. And if you're going to deal him, it's going to take a prospect or two. And who knows, maybe even another player at the big league level and a prospect to get that bat that you want. And is that going to be comfortable for the Royals? I don't believe it would be comfortable. But what would be more uncomfortable is not landing a bat whatsoever. And you have this surplus of pitching. You've got so many starters at your disposal. Somebody is going to have to be included in a deal to get the bat that you want. And whoever that would be, because it's clear that it's either Kris Bubic, Noah Cameron, Ryan Bergert, or Stephen Kolek, one of those guys is either going to have to be replaced in the rotation, or you're going to have to slide somebody up from the bullpen to be that seventh starter, right? If you were to deal a Bergert or Kolek, those guys obviously are not in the rotation. So somebody in the bullpen would have to step up and almost take that role that they would almost certainly have. To me, though, I don't see those guys generating the trade interest that Bubic and Cameron are. Bubic is generating trade interest for obvious reasons. Teams feel like they can get him without mortgaging away a big-time player or mortgaging away their future. Noah Cameron, obvious reasons there as well. You've got somebody who finished fourth in Rookie of the Year voting. You've got somebody that had a pretty big workload as well, was incredibly effective, and oh, by the way, has multiple years of control. So you're counting on him being your number 3 starter for the next handful of years. And if you have to give up a bat, you're just hoping that you have a good enough bat to replace that player. In the same way the Royals are hoping to replace one of those guys with another effective starter. And there can be confidence on both sides. I mean, the Royals are not going to part ways with pitching just because they have a lot of it. It's going to take a big offer. It's going to take a deal that really can move the needle with this lineup. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to deal Kris Bubic just to say you made a trade, right? Last year, they made the trade for Jonathan India, gave up Brady Singer, and in the end, it ended up burning the Royals more than it burned the Reds. Now, the Reds are also looking to move Brady Singer this offseason, so it could have just been a 1-for-1 for 1 year, right? Or I guess the Royals did get Joey Wiemer in that deal, but he never appeared in Kansas City. But that was a deal that burned the Royals because they didn't really have that pitching depth in the middle of the season to August and September. And they didn't get much really at all from Jonathan India. So that's what would make you hesitate a little bit of, yeah, we need the bat. Where last year it was we need the leadoff bat. Now it's we need the impact middle of the order bat. It's going to cost more than just one pitcher. It's going to cost you multiple prospects, or it's going to cost you, a pitcher with more years of control, and you may not be willing to part ways with it. But at some point, push comes to shove, you're going to need to get that bat. And maybe that means you're pivoting to free agency. It's made all the sense in the world for the Royals to go the trade route. And I still have 80% confidence that is going to be the case here. But if you are trying every single outlet and you're not getting enough for Bubic and you don't want to trade Noah Cameron or Ryan Bergert or Stephen Kolek, well, then it's time to pony up a little bit and get the money to go get one of the outfielders that can move the needle in that lineup. Do you believe the Royals will still trade Kris Bubic? And if so, who else would they have to include? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. When we come back, talked about this last night a little bit, but I want to go over some other options the Royals could turn to for a right-handed outfielder. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. Want to tell you about the title sponsor and our only sponsor today in FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Tonight, I'll look to the Champions Classic at Madison Square Garden. I will go straight up with the money line on Michigan State, and I will go straight up on the money line with the Duke Blue Devils. You have a couple Blue Bloods out there. Should be a fantastic night of college basketball. And we have Feast Week next week, so you'll probably be hearing me put a couple of bets down on FanDuel for some of those great tournament games next week during Thanksgiving. So I constantly, scrolled through Spotrac, and I looked at articles involving likely trade candidates because I don't want to lead anybody astray and throw out a name that has virtually no chance of being traded. We've had commenters before throw out names that, though I do entertain, and I think it's great to get that interaction, to see a comment like that. There are times that I'll read a name and I'll go, there's no chance that team is dealing that player, just based on where they're at and based on either being in the division with the Royals or based on the price and knowing what the Royals would want to do in the offseason and that not really matching up. And so when it comes to these trade targets, I'm not sure that outside of the names that we've mentioned, there is that obvious pick to pivot to. Like if they make a trade that isn't involving one of the outfielders we've mentioned for the last week, which that includes Taylor Ward, Joe Adell, Jarren Duran, Wilyer Abreu, and Brendan Donovan, who can also play second base. So those 4 to 5 names, if it's not one of them, which it wouldn't be cheap whatsoever, well, what do you pivot to, right? Who can you pivot to? And is that bat going to be enough? Is that bat going to be the right fit? Because there are bad teams out there, right, that are not going to be good whatsoever in 2026. For example, the White Sox have a lot of Royals influence, even more so now they took Zach Bowe from the Royals. But you've got Chris Getz as the GM. You've got multiple coaches that spent time in Kansas City. There is that connection, obviously. So I would say of all the AL Central teams that could strike a deal with the Royals, the White Sox would be the most likely. Tigers don't need to because they're the front runner in this division. Cleveland definitely won't. Minnesota maybe just because they're going to be tanking the next couple of years, but they don't have any outfielders that they would really be looking to move. If anything, they're going to trade either Joe Ryan or Pablo Lopez. So for the White Sox, who does that bring up? Well, the obvious candidate would be Luis Robert. But there's severe concerns for Luis Robert that have nothing to do with ability. It's about the injury concerns, which he's almost never been healthy in his big league career. And then you have to question at times the motivation. We have seen some lazy play from Luis Robert, but that's also because he's been in Chicago for a long time. And outside of some of those great playoff runs, you haven't seen the same type of player. Now, when he was on those playoff teams, it was about the injuries. He still couldn't stay healthy in some of those seasons. In fact, all of those seasons, he couldn't stay healthy. But that's a right-handed bat where you go, who knows? Maybe if it was a change in scenery, you come to Kansas City, and what if he played left field? He's a good defender out there in center field when he wants to be. But what if you can lessen the chances of an injury by putting him in left field? Now, with the Royals, I'll never rule that out because when they traded for Jonathan India, not in my wildest dreams would I have said he's going to play left field and third base. So they will move players around, but that also could backfire. Maybe Luis Robert wants to play center field and doesn't want to move to a corner outfield spot. But that's what I'm getting at here is there's some teams out there that are going to be bad in 2026, but may not be inclined to move a right-handed outfielder. So do you pivot to free agency? Right? There are a number of options out there. Harrison Bader, Austin Hayes, Lane Thomas. But you know what all three of those guys have in common? They're platoon bats. You're not getting that everyday left fielder in the production. You're certainly not getting that from Hayes, Bader, or Lane Thomas. And for some of those guys, you're counting on them to play much better than they did in 2025. The most notable one being Lane Thomas. He was banged up and hit sub 200. You're not going to pivot from getting your middle of the order bat to say, well, we'll give Lane Thomas a 1-year deal and he can be our left fielder. That's not going to be enough to get it done. But across the league, right, you've got your obvious candidates. Look to Colorado. We had a Mailbag Friday listener say Brenton Doyle in last week's episode. Brenton Doyle would make a lot of sense. I feel that he's been a very underrated piece and has just been buried in Colorado due to their poor performance. But is that a name that you go for? He's got great defense. I believe his bat could play well in Kansas City. But Colorado almost never is involved in offseason trades. And I'll even throw in, I don't believe they're that involved in trade deadline trades. They just always seem to be stagnant and very content with where they're at. They do need to tear it all down and rebuild, and Brenton Doyle's not going to be a part of the next competitive Colorado team. So maybe you go on the National League side of things. But there also might be that team that's in limbo a little bit, right? They're not really sure what they want to do, but they know they need pitching. So you look across baseball, who are some teams that desperately need pitching? Well, the truthful answer is every team needs pitching out there. Right? The Athletics need pitching. They're mentioned in Jeff Passan's article, but also said that they're not really willing to trade anybody from one of the top offenses in all of baseball. And if that surprises you, it is the case. The A's have a top 5 offense in baseball, and they're not really looking to tear that down at all. Another right-handed bat I forgot to bring up was Miguel Andujar, who's put together some really good seasons back-to-back years, both, I believe, with Cincinnati and with the Athletics. But he's not an everyday player. He's another platoon bat. And that's why if you're to get your everyday player, I'm not sure it's going to be the free agent route. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to get it done with just one pitcher from your starting rotation. As we've already touched on in the first segment, this is what makes it so difficult to strike deals in the offseason because there's this sense of optimism from every team in baseball, even teams like Colorado. When you're in the offseason, it's your fresh start. Everybody is 0-0. And unless they're blown away by a deal, the easiest thing they can do is say, we'll just revisit at the trade deadline. If we're bad at the trade deadline, there's no way around it, then we can go about striking a deal. But the Royals are in that tough spot where they don't know. They're confident, but really, I don't know, and I would say most of baseball doesn't know, if they're going to be a true buyer at the deadline. Now, the last 2 years they have been, but the goal is not to be hovering around 500 or a few games over to strike a deal to put you over the finish line. The goal for every team that wants to be buying at the deadline is we're safe from, being eliminated in the regular season, for lack of a better term, right? We're safe. We're going to be getting into October. We're making deals to enhance our chances of getting to the World Series. We want to make a deep run. That's why we're making these deals at the deadline. In 2024, it was a little bit of both. Bolster the bullpen, give yourself a chance with the depth you have to get to October and roll the dice. Last year, it was just simply getting there. This year needs to be, we have a good team, a good record. We have a solidified spot in the standings, even though you looked at Detroit last year and they were in danger of missing the postseason after having a 90+% chance of making it at the trade deadline. But that's what I'm getting at here with these lesser teams in terms of just record at the winter meetings. They may not want to move some of their players because they may want to see what team they can assemble before making any decision like that. You need to have that perfect match of a GM that fully is aware their team is not going to compete. They are not going to be spending money in the offseason, and they want to bring in one of the Royals pitchers. They're interested. Like, it's the perfect match there. Don't want to spend a lot of money in free agency, want to unload on a bad team, but are willing to take on a deal that the Royals are willing to offer them, right? To be interested in working with J.J. Picollo. And once we know that, we'll get a better grasp at what other right-handed outfielders they could be looking to. But there's far more options in free agency, but they're not looking for platoon bats. They're looking for everyday players that could be in left field. And that doesn't mean it's only going to be right-handed hitters. They would prefer it to be that way. But if the deal matches up where they can get a left field that plays every day and he hits from the left side, so be it, as long as you get that offensive production in the middle of the order. Let's take our final break of the show. When we come back, the final report I want to go over from Jeff Passan's article and from Ken Rosenthal was the Rangers are looking to move 2 bats before the non-tender deadline on Friday. Who are they, and would the Royals be in play on either of those 2? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. The final report that we're going to dive into here involves the Texas Rangers, and at least one of them that could make sense for the Royals in a unique role. So the 2 players, I've done enough teasing for you guys in these last three parts of this episode. It's Adolis Garcia and it's Jonah Heim. Jonah Heim, of course, the catcher for the Rangers. Adolis Garcia has been the right fielder and postseason hero of the Rangers the last couple of years. Should be worth noting, both players are coming off lesser seasons, down seasons. Adolis Garcia was just below being a league average bat, had 19 bombs, but an elite right fielder. Like, unbelievable arm, really can cover a lot of ground out there. There's a lot to like defensively from Adolis Garcia. Same goes for Jonah Heim. But let's get that right out of the way. The Royals aren't trading for Jonah Heim. He's a catcher. There's no reason whatsoever with Salvador Perez and Carter Jensen on the roster to make a deal for Jonah Heim. Adolis Garcia is interesting because I go back to a couple of episodes we did prior to the trade deadline last year, and Adolis Garcia was mentioned more than a few times because the Rangers were looking to move him, but clearly were asking for too much and nobody bid. Nobody wanted to take on Adolis Garcia and the sub 230 average, sub 280 on-base percentage, and declining power, right? He did have a little bit of a stretch toward the trade deadline where the power numbers surged, the Rangers were surging, and he became an intriguing target, but then the Rangers were in the postseason race, and there was no need to trade him at that point. They wanted to keep him around, and now they're revisiting it in the offseason. But what I found to be interesting on this is kind of in the same way the Phillies are working with Nick Castellanos. They're trying to trade these guys. So the Rangers are trying to move Adolis Garcia, Jonah Heim. Phillies are trying to move Nick Castellanos. 2 of those guys are right-handed bats. I also believe that 2 of those guys have seen their final days of being an everyday starter. I don't view either of them, no matter what they're making, as everyday players in right or left field. And so we heard this from J.J. Picollo last week, which was they are looking for a right-handed bat that could complement Jack Caglione in right field. Now, with this report about Adolis Garcia, it's also mentioned that if they don't find a trade partner come Friday, there's a chance that they non-tender them. So then they can become completely open to the rest of baseball, become even more likely. So I could see teams holding back a little bit and saying, well, we're not going to make a trade because these guys could be non-tendered on Friday. But it's kind of the who's bluffing, right? There's a chance the Rangers say, well, we're trying to move him, then we're going to tender their contracts. And then they're going to be with us. Not saying they couldn't move him still in the offseason, but there could be teams that are not willing to bite until they know what the Rangers are doing on Friday. If you're the Royals, I believe there's a world in which you could offer up a little and get Adolis Garcia. You would not have to give up a top prospect. You would not have to give up a pitcher from your rotation. I don't believe any of that. I believe they could trade away somebody that is truthfully blocked in Kansas City to get Adolis Garcia, coming off back-to-back years where he was a below-average bat. And I fully am aware of the fact that he does not hit lefties very well. In fact, he hit 199 against lefties. However, the right-handed options to complement Jack Caglione last year were not power bats like Adolis Garcia, and certainly not elite defenders like Adolis Garcia. So if there was a scenario in which you could look to the Rangers and say, well, we do want a right-handed bat. We don't want to give up too much. We don't want to overpay for a platoon bat, right? We don't want to give a Rob Refsnyder over $10 million a year. They still could, and maybe that is the case. But if you wanted to go a different route and give up a little for Adolis Garcia, I could see why it would work. It's a fresh start. You come to Kansas City. He's played in huge outfields before. I mean, so that gives you a boost with the defense. But if you're looking for a platoon right fielder, I could see a world in which Adolis Garcia makes sense because of that defense. And honestly, that's all I'm looking for this compliment to Jack Caglione. We're going to be seeing him a lot, and the Royals already said they view him to be a really good player for them down the road. But they still want to have that secondary option when they're facing lefties or when he's going through a slump. You want to turn to somebody. Why not go for somebody that you're not having to give up a ton for? It could be that right-handed bat, has tremendous power still, and is an elite defender. You didn't have that in the outfield last year. Your only good defender in the outfield was Kyle Isbell. Mike Yastrzemski handled right field just fine. But you could have one of the better defensive right fielders in the game have a little bit of the pop. And yeah, the offensive numbers have been down. But if you had a bat that could back up Jack Caglione, that could OPS plus around 95, 5 points below the league average, it's not as bad as you would think, considering they had guys that were in the 50s and 60s last year that were playing right field when Jack Caglione wasn't out there. So I find it interesting that the Rangers are trying to move him. And maybe you just say, we're going to wait and see. We're not interested. We don't want to deal anybody from our farm system for a guy that has had back-to-back down years. But I'm only viewing him as a platoon bat, as a bench bat. I don't believe he's an everyday starter anymore. And clearly, the Rangers don't either. That's why they're looking to move them, or maybe they get to Friday and they non-tender their contracts. Right, there's a chance, too, the Royals could be non-tendering a couple of guys as well, and guys that were starting every single day, or mostly every day. Jonathan India is one of those names. Maybe the Royals are trying to move him because, as we know, he's set to make near $10 million. Is that worth it for the Royals with the production he gave you last year and what you might expect to get from him in 2026? The Royals need to raise the floor of the outfield, and I feel if the price was right, if you were not giving up much, you were trading away a guy that was blocked, and you do have a good relationship with the Rangers and striking deals before, I could see a scenario in which that happens. I could also see another team jumping on it before the non-tender deadline on Friday, just to see if he could be a bounce-back candidate. He's got 30 home run potential, but he's also not an everyday player anymore. We know that Jack Caglione is going to be in right field a lot in 2026. But to have somebody that could theoretically play two of the outfield spots, be a right-handed bat, and a power option off the bench, if it wasn't costing you a ton, then it would make sense. But again, I have no idea what the Rangers would be looking for. But I can tell you this from past history of non-tender candidates. If you are looking to trade somebody before a non-tender deadline and you're planning on non-tendering them, you're not getting a big return to begin with. You're kind of just hoping you can get some form of value for your bullpen or somewhere in your farm system. But gone are the days where you could get tremendous value for a player you're already looking to move on from this Friday. Do you believe Adolis Garcia could be a good platoon option for the Royals? let us know in the YouTube comments below. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. For your second, find the all-night Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we'll be bringing you another episode going over some platoon options for the outfield. And who knows, maybe we can pivot back to the bullpen and what guys could be available to replace some players I don't believe will be back in 2026. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.